you're familiar with this type of thing happening?
Oh, certainly, yes. Unfortunately, this is not the first time. But what's really unfortunate about it is that Islamic supremacists seem to be able to control the narrative and dictate to the opposition, to the people who are on the side of freedom, who is acceptable and who isn't. And it's a cowardice on our side that is extraordinarily unfortunate.
Are you on the mainstream, or does the media paint you as an extremist, or is it mixed?
Well, what's mainstream and what's extremist? I stand, just like Pamela Geller stands, for human rights, for the freedom of speech, for the freedom of conscience, for equality of rights for all people. Is that extremist? The idea that we are on the fringe is a tactic of the Islamic groups and the mainstream media in order to try to discredit our message and to keep it from being heard. But actually, there's nothing out of the ordinary in what we say. We're just standing for sane values in an insane world.
How often do you feel you get a fair shake in the mainstream media?
Never.
Really?
Never.
Really? Like never a New York Times article mentioning you that you thought was fair?
Never, not one. I've been mentioned many times in the New York Times, but never right. Never fairly.
Washington Post, LA
Never.
Times, never fairly. What are their primary ways of describing you?
As anti-Muslim, as if to stand for freedom and human rights is against a group of people. We are certainly opposed to the Islamic supremacist ideology of the oppression of women, the oppression of non-Muslims, the denial of freedom of speech, the death penalty for apostates. Of course we're against all that. But that means that we're in favor of humane values. And so to portray us as being against a certain group of people is a remarkably tendentious and manipulative way to describe us that is intended to discredit us from the start.
How do bookstores like Borders or Barnes & Nobles treat your books?
Well, they can't help but sell them when they sell. But I know that, for example, I'll give you an example about Borders. I wrote a biography of Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, in 2006. And Karen Armstrong, who is an apologist for Islam, she wrote a biography of Muhammad right at the same time. And they put hers in the Islam section, where you would expect both to be, and they put mine in medieval history. So people had no trouble finding hers, but a great deal of difficulty finding mine. And this kind of thing happens in the big chain bookstores all the time.
Who would you describe as your compatriots in this cause, fellow intellectuals who you would describe as being similarly oriented to yourself?
Well, certainly Pamela, as well as Walid Shubat and Batya Orr, the late Oriana Fallaci. There's so many, really, it's hard to know where to begin.
What are there anti-Muslim voices that you find too extreme, that you find distasteful?
Yes.
Can you name any?
No.
Why not?
Because I'm not in the business of denouncing people. I am in the business of upholding freedom and human rights. And I have made my stands very clear on over many years, many books, thousands of blog posts, hundreds of articles. There's no uncertainty about where I stand. And if people want to associate me with some people who are standing for other values, then they have no leg to stand on. But I'm not going to give anybody any ammunition.
I'm sorry, I just came in late to this. Who
Hello.
are you?
Robert Spencer.
I write about Islam and jihad.
He's written many books on Islam. How long has this been a focus of your attention?
Well, publicly since 9/11, but privately I was consulting for several groups about these issues in the 90s.
In the 80s?
In the 90s.
In the 90s,
I first started studying Islam and read the Quran and so on in the early 80s.
How about Arabic? Do you read Arabic?
Yeah, it could be better, but I do read it to some degree.
Right.
I wouldn't say I'm fluent.
Can you think of an example of any country that's become more Muslim and more free?
And more free?
Yeah.
No, that's never happened. Islamic law is not free. Islamic law does not uphold basic values that we consider to be core principles of human rights. And so there is no country that adopts Islamic law in its fullness that upholds those rights. Never has happened.
Now, the American ethos is that we never down any religion. Am I correct in that kind of?
Yeah, and that's all for. I'm all for that. But there are restrictions that have been placed on religious practice, quite rightly, like the outlawing of polygamy that was part of the Mormon Church, and there is a political aspect to Islam that is not purely religious, and it would seem to me that this is a distinction that's going to have to be drawn sooner or later in American law, that people are perfectly free to practice the Islamic faith as an individual religious faith, but when they start to assert its political and supremacist aspects that are in contradiction to the U.S. Constitution, then we have to resist that.
How big a problem are honor killings, say, in the United States?
It's a growing problem. There have been numerous honor killings in the United States, and there's more and more. There are more and more all the time. There was one in Detroit, in the Detroit area, the Jessica Mokdad case that we named our conference on honor killing in April. After Jessica Mokdad, there was Noor Al-Maliki in Phoenix, who was run over by her father in a car because she was not living the Muslim lifestyle. Jessica Mokdad was murdered for not wearing the hijab, just like Aqsa Parvez in Mississauga, Ontario. Also, the Said sisters in Dallas area, or Irving, Texas, who were murdered by their father for having non-Muslim boyfriends. There have been several others. There was a lady in Georgia. There was another lady in Florida, and so on. And the problem is that every time these things happen, the news stories say, well, honor killing has nothing to do with Islam. And actually, honor killing is something that is allowed for in Islam. 91% of honor murders take place among Muslims. And the states of Jordan, of Syria, of Iraq, as well as the Palestinian Authority have lesser penalties for honor murders. And Islamic clerics have resisted any change to that on Islamic grounds. Islamic law stipulates no penalty for a father who kills a child. And so to say that there's nothing to do with that Islam has nothing to do with it when there are honor murders is only to make for the situation where more of these murders are likely to happen, because we are not dealing with the problem at its root. And until we challenge the Muslim community to teach against and fight against the core assumptions that lead to honor killing, there are only going to be more in the West, in the United States.
Are there leading Islamic clerics who you see as a bright light for freedom and hope and really, there are no leading, I mean, of course there are individual voices.
The leading Islamic cleric in the world is Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, who said that we're going to finish the job Hitler started, and has justified suicide attacks and all kinds of things of this nature. And he's the leading Islamic cleric in the world. He's on Al Jazeera, and he has numerous books. He's extraordinarily famous and renowned. He's also the spiritual leader of the Muslim Brotherhood, and returned to Egypt after having been barred there for 50 years, just last year. Some of the leading Islamic clerics in the world are generally, the leading Islamic clerics in the world are generally all on the other side. The problem is that Islam does teach warfare against unbelievers and hatred of Jews and Islamic supremacism and so on, and so death for apostasy and so on. And so if you're going to become a cleric, you're generally going to buy these things. And if you're going to become a leading cleric, then you're going to hold them even more fervently or more eloquently or more effectively than your peers. And so the leading Islamic clerics in the world are not voices of reason or reform.
Are there any leading clerics criticizing the cleric you just mentioned, like taking him on?
No.
That you're aware of? No. What about Muslim clerics in Los Angeles? Do you have any sense of what's being preached in mosques in Los Angeles?
Well, they're very secretive in Los Angeles, as well as everywhere else. I think there needs to to be some serious investigation of that question, but nobody really knows. And they preach in
Howard,
Arabic.
I'll take some pictures
and
now. I was listening to her.
They preach in Arabic, and they're not being monitored. It's interesting to note that there's deception on a large scale, even deception in all kinds of little ways, I should say. And it's not a large scale, a small scale. For example, you have the King Fahd Mosque around here.
Is that in Culver City?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. And I've been there, and I remember seeing the sign. And the sign said something like Islamic Center of Los Angeles. But then in Arabic, it said Masjid Ibn Taymiyyah. Now, it did not translate that into English. That was nowhere on the sign in English. But Ibn Taymiyyah was a medieval Islamic cleric who taught very fiercely the necessity to wage war against Jews and Christians and subjugate them under the rule of Islam and deny them basic rights in that regard.
When did he live?
In the 14th century.
Oh, was he the leading Muslim philosopher?
He's not the leading Muslim philosopher. That's Al-Ghazali. Or, you could even... Well, anyway, that's another question.
Sorry.
The thing, Ibn Taymiyyah is a leading Islamic jurist and thinker who was much admired of Osama bin Laden because of his ferocity in teaching the necessity to wage war on religious grounds against non-Muslims. And that's the name of the mosque. And it's telling that they do not translate that part into English on the sign. So that nobody who knows, unless you know how to read Arabic, nobody's going to see that Ibn Taymiyyah is on the sign at all. Because that might raise alarm bells for people who are informed. But Islamic Center of Los Angeles sounds perfectly benign.
Dennis, sorry, I'll just walk quick and then I'll stop. Sorry. Dennis Prager says that there are lots of moderate Muslims who wish no ill, but they have no power or influence in Muslim life.
That's quite right. And that's right because Islam does teach, all the sects and schools of Islamic jurisprudence teach warfare against unbelievers and hatred of Jews and subjugation of the non-Muslims under the rule of Islamic law. These things are not taught by a tiny minority of extremists. These things are taught by all the schools of Sunni and Shiite Islamic jurisprudence and all the sects of Islam that are recognized as mainstream. The sects of Islam that do not teach these kinds of things, like the Ahmadiyya, are persecuted precisely because they reject these things. And so there are plenty of Muslims who have no interest in doing anything but just having a peaceful life and having a job and raising their families and so on. But they don't speak out because they know they don't have any leg to stand on theologically or juridically within Islamic law.
Have you made efforts to encourage those parts of Islam to speak up?
Well, the people have been encouraging them to speak up for 10 years, and we don't have anything. You know, you would think that if the vast majority of Muslims actually disapproved of the jihad that is being waged against the West today, then we would see huge organizations, not just an individual here and an individual there, but huge organizations of Muslims who were dedicated to fighting against these attitudes and beliefs within their own community. And we don't see that, and that's an indication of the fact that they know that they do not have a foundation within traditional Islamic law.
Where are you based?
I don't say that because I have so many death threats. I don't generally reveal that.
I want to ask you something. Would you be willing to have a debate with Reza Aslan about everything that you
Yeah, I'll debate Reza Aslan. He won't debate me.
He won't debate you?
Yeah, ask him.
Are you planning on being here this morning?
But we also want to make sure
Yeah, I was gonna
Just Google it and you'll find my contact
So
info.
we're going to be here tomorrow. Let me say hi. Please say we're going to meet at the mark.
Oh, I'd be happy to debate Reza Aslan. Reza Aslan fears to debate me because he knows that I'm onto him. He knows that I know the truth about his support for Hamas, Hezbollah, the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Islamic Republic of Iran. And he knows that I've got the goods on it and that I've published it at Jihad Watch, and he knows he has no response. And so the only thing he will respond to you with is scorn. But the scorn is hollow and empty because I have the facts.
Yeah.
And I will debate him anytime. If you bring him up right now, I'll debate him.
Thank you.